The next day, in the afternoon, Jen finally returned to the city. He was exhausted. He hadn't slept or eaten for 2 days now, but he was satisfied that he was able to complete his mission. He escorted the 2 unlucky co-workers to the headquarters of his macro section. All his colleagues were surprised to see them still alive and could not help but compliment him. Even K2 looked pleased. The tiredness and hunger that were torturing our protagonist didn't even allow him to enjoy this moment, and he was forced by them to leave the office as soon as possible to go home. Jen's appearance was truly awful. He looked and smelled like a dead man, and he had worn the same clothes for 2 days. He, as well, felt like a walking corpse. He couldn't wait to go home and lie down on his bed. He realized that it was the time when the school kids finished their lessons to go home. A little thought went to Sean. He wondered if the boy was okay. If he was experiencing school as badly as Jen had experienced it as a young man. Every school day was hell. He dragged himself exhausted from fatigue through the streets of the city, with a beautiful radiant sun that illuminated that sick green sky and gently warmed his pale skin. He started to sweat, not so much from the temperature, but his body didn't seem to be able to handle the sleep deprivation anymore. One way or another, he finally made it to his apartment, staggering like a drunkard. He rested his head on the door, falling asleep for a few minutes. He woke up abruptly and, after a few moments of post-awakening panic, he slowly took the house keys out of his pockets and opened the door even more slowly. He entered the house and immediately felt at ease. He was exactly where he wanted to be. He closed the door and, without even taking off his clothes, plunged into the comfort of his bed and fell asleep almost instantly. His sleep, however, was soon interrupted. A nuisance was knocking insistently on the door. At first, he thought of just ignoring them, but they kept knocking without stopping for a second, as if they lived in that house and had been locked out. Jen lay on the bed for 10 minutes, and for 10 minutes they were knocking on his door, doing it more and more frantically and with more force. He was forced to go and see who it was, and this left him quite annoyed. He swore to himself that if it was nothing important, he would pin them to the wall. With superhuman effort, he got out of bed and headed for the door. With an annoyed and hoarse voice, he asked,
"Who's there?"
to the stranger, who replied,
"Open this door, imbecile."
They had a female voice, that of a 13 to 14-year-old girl. A few baffled seconds later, Jen realized it was simply her coming home from school. She was her younger sister, Jennifer. He quickly opened the door, bracing himself for her screams and her complaints.
"I waited 10 minutes like an idiot in front of this stupid door. Explain to me why the hell it took you so long to get here."
"Why didn't you open it? You have the keys."
"You left your keys in the lock. I couldn't open it, idiot."
"Oh?"
he said, almost huffing.
"You gave me a heart attack. I thought you passed out, or I don't know what. You look awful."
Jen glared at her, answering her affirmation with a look that seemed to say, "As if I didn't already know it." He rubbed his eyes, trying to come to his senses for a moment. He watched his sister for a few seconds, making sure she didn't want anything and wouldn't come and interrupt him once he went back to sleep. He was grateful to see her again, after having left her alone for 2 days. The two lived together and Jen was her guardian. It was a relief for him whenever he saw her healthy and happy after he returned from an outside mission. But in the end, he raised her himself. He believed she was a strong little girl with a bright future.
"I was dying of thirst,"
she said, using her telekinetic powers to bring a glass cup closer to her.
"You know, I was thinking, why the heck am I the only child not born with Esper powers?"
Jen said, finding the little energy left in him to speak. He then continued,
"Are you too lucky, or am I just unfortunate as usual?"
Jennifer didn't answer. She was drinking some water from the glass she had just picked up. After noticing that she didn't seem to want anything else, Jen headed to bed in search of much-needed sleep.
"Hey, do you have a second?"
she asked. Those were the last words he wanted to hear at that moment.
"I'm sorry, but I don't. I'm exhausted."
"Please, something serious happened at school."
Jen knew his sister's rather melodramatic personality and was aware that her concept of serious often included situations that were insignificant to many people, but he was his brother. He genuinely cared for her sister's well-being and offered to help her several times, even though her problems bored him. So, he sat down at the table and invited her to do the same.
Fine. But it must be something serious, for real, otherwise I'm leaving. Just tell me what happened.
Thank you.
Jennifer, while she was sitting down, was silent for a few seconds. She then replied,
An idiot confessed his love for me. But I don't like him at all. He's that red-haired, brown-eyed loser who's in my class who always acts weird. Of course, I rejected and insulted him.
Jen shivered for a second. That boy was Sean. That little idiot had just confessed to her sister. The coincidence was truly something incredible. However, Jennifer had no idea that Jen knew Sean, and Sean had no idea that Jennifer was his sister. Surprised by the coincidences of fate and feeling almost compelled to help a person who found himself in similar difficulties to his, he had decided to help him, but Jen had never dreamed of making them interact with each other. He kept repeating in his head how stupid this situation was. He, a rough man, accustomed to doing unpleasant things, the one who was once a vigilante, why was he acting as a supervisor of a romantic comedy?
You can't understand the embarrassment he made me feel.
Continued the girl.
He did it in the corridor of the school, in front of everyone. You don't know how much my friends laughed at me. Even Bennett, that bitch, was laughing.
But Jen wasn't listening anymore. He knew that partly, perhaps mostly, the boy did what he did due to that stupid advice he had given him. He felt some guilt, but the thing that bothered him and that he feared was that fixing this mess would take a lot of time and effort. He knew her sister would do just fine. He raised her, and he knew she was a strong girl. She practically never met her parents except in the first months of her life. She was educated and raised by Jen, who took care of her like a good older brother. Jen was worried more for that brat Sean. He knew he was socially awkward, but he didn't believe that he was that awkward. While he was tormented by these thoughts, his sister eagerly awaited his answer.
Are you still there? Don't tell me you fell asleep.
What? No, I was just thinking. Don't worry, now rest, you've had a bad day, tomorrow I'll tell you what to do.
Jennifer tried to appear impassive in the face of the situation, but now it was noticeable that she was barely holding back the tears. She was a strong girl, but still a girl, although, for many of us, this may seem ridiculous. For the life of this girl, it was a very serious misfortune. To understand people's problems you have to consider their point of view and put aside your personal opinions, and Jen, despite everything, knew this very well.
Okay. I'll do as you say.
Jennifer said.
But I want to ask you a favor. Can you go with me to school tomorrow? I don't feel like going there alone again.
Sure, no problem. I will find a way to solve your problems, it's not that hard. But now let me sleep or I risk passing out on this table.
She smiled softly. He managed to get a small laugh out of her.
Thanks, Jen.
He didn't even finish the conversation properly when he threw himself back on the bed and fell asleep again suddenly with his dirty clothes on. Meanwhile, her sister went to the kitchen and started devouring all the chocolate they had in the fridge. It was a little vice of hers that came out whenever she felt under stress. But she was careful not to overdo it. She certainly didn't want to gain weight and compromise her popularity. Something she cared about a lot and something that in this place was synonymous with success. She was a very pretty girl with a bold personality, so bold that she often managed to intimidate even adults. But overall, all the 13 to 14-year-olds in the city showed a maturity and an awareness that would be shocking for us. Her popularity was rivaled by another girl called Bennett, with whom she pretended a friendship, hiding a certain envy towards her, while in the darkness they fought a war to become the most beautiful and the most popular. This little game, which apparently seemed childish, useless and exhausting, is actually part of a larger scheme that is implicitly taught within the schools of the city. There was a game in which all students had to participate, whether they liked it or not. It was a disparate and nerve-wracking popularity race. The successful kids were those who were considered popular, while the unpopular, or as they were called, the losers, had nothing but the crumbs left by the others. However, It's a grave mistake to think that those losers were useless. According to the mentality of the city, the important thing was to stand on top of the so-called social pyramid, and losers were those who had to be looked down upon by others, to make sure that these others gave their best not to become losers and that the losers gave their best to get out of this condition. The goal was clear: to instill in young minds the mentality of efficiency, individualism, and self-assertion, key concepts in the city, so they would be ready to enter the world of work, and possibly politics. School grades had secondary importance. It was implicitly popularity that determined a person's true worth. The schools, coherently with this thought, granted much more freedom than other places because with this method this race for popularity could be expressed at its best, and the youngsters would have unconsciously associated the school with the place where they could express their personality and give their best, so that, in future, they would automatically recognize the workplace as such. To strengthen their personality, youngsters need competition, according to this view. Although it was against the rules, they were left free to chat during lessons, have fun, and meet up with any friends. Even the concept of friendship was contentious and sick. It was more like a mutually sustaining alliance. They would have eventually adapted to the rules once they entered the world of work, also because they were well aware that only in school could they behave in this way, and those who weren't faced devastating consequences. The school was perhaps the only thing that had remained similar to the old world, where the scholastic model was based on the European ones, with students who carry out all the lessons in the same room and grades ranging from 1 to 10, where 7 represents the passing grade. Jennifer could consider herself a lucky girl. She was an Esper, which is why she already had a considerable head start in this grueling race for popularity. Her parents were 2 carriers of a common Esper gene, managing to give birth to 2 Esper daughters, she and Jane, who is older than her but younger than Jen, and a common male, who however by chance had managed to awaken his powers throughout his life. According to the rules of the city, all Idas estimated from the high level upwards would have followed lessons in private courses, organized by the respective macro sections, while those from the medium level downwards would have continued lessons in ordinary schools, obviously excluding the children and first-degree relatives of members of strong political importance, who attended particular schools in the center of the city, until they would have graduated. Following this event, the Idas immediately entered the macro section most suited to the nature of their powers. Jennifer rarely used her powers, and she never used them against other people, as her brother had taught her. She very often entertained and amazed her friends by using her powers to play pranks and shows. Inside the school, both she and Bennett were daily inundated by attentions from boys strongly interested in them or their friends, and they were able to manage the various problems of their social life with the same skill of an experienced entrepreneur, able to exploit every single resource at their disposal. Jennifer's personality was greatly influenced by Jen's teachings and manners. She was an orphan since a very young age, and her brother was a central point of reference throughout her life, perhaps the only person for whom she felt genuine affection. Though she had an attractive physical appearance, Jennifer did not have any partner boyfriend at the time. Even relating to the opposite sex was something essential, according to the vision of the city. During her life, she had several, often changing them a little out of boredom, a little because she was looking for something in the opposite sex that not even she understood. But she had grown tired of this boring game, as she called it. Also, many of the kids at school and all of her exes were terrified of both Jen, who was very protective of her sister, and Jennifer herself, who after all was an Esper. School was mandatory up to the age of 16. Subsequently, each student was obliged to complete the so-called 16-year-old exam, consisting of a check on the knowledge of all the subjects studied up until that moment and a series of questionnaires that established, through a series of questions, designed to understand the psyche of the individual and his working capacity, the ideal job that each individual will have to follow until the end of his working career. This exam was crucial in determining the future of the students. Depending on the results, a precise type of work was chosen for each of them. Some of them would continue their studies, in case their grades weren't good enough during one of the school years. If the vote in the theoretical part of the 16-year-old exam is insufficient, or if it appears in the questionnaires that the behavioral attitudes of the individual could compromise their working abilities, the students were sent to a recruitment camp. Here training will take place, which will allow them to become members of the subordinated macro section. Basically, they joined the military. This place, however, had a lot of infamy. It was said that inside the recruits were subjected to continuous psychological torture and humiliation to cancel the individual's personality and proceed with the creation of an unscrupulous war machine. Parents could not see their children until the end of the training, which usually lasted 3 years. No one wants to end up in such a place. Once someone successfully completed the psycho-aptitude and academic skills exam, they were considered adults, therefore they no longer have the benefits of being a minor. The central government immediately offered a house to every adult, but only in case she had a partner of the opposite sex. This was because, as space was limited, it was not possible to afford to support a house just for a single individual, and the city wanted to encourage any couple to have children. This is to allow a continuous growth of population, which is considered necessary, despite the limited space, for a future repopulation of the Earth, and most importantly to prevent the trend from going negative. In the city, the average life expectancy for a common man was only 55 years, a situation due to the numerous diseases that appeared due to the poor environmental conditions of the planet. Idas did not have to submit to this rule and could have their own personal home. Adults without a partner have half the rights of a normal citizen and double the obligations. If they were without a partner for more than 3 years, they were considered unable to relate to the opposite sex and sent to the recruitment camps. Divorces were possible, but only if both individuals had a single adult replacement for their partner. Jen slept so much that he woke up the following morning, just before dawn. In the first moments of awakening, his nose began to smell a nauseating scent, and very soon he realized that the smell came from his fetid body. Given the circumstances, as soon as he got out of bed, the first thing he did was a nice hot shower. After he looked decent again, it was his stomach that started complaining, reminding him that he hadn't eaten for 3 days and ordering him to fix this as soon as possible. He then went to the kitchen and cooked a large breakfast that he quickly devoured, trying to remind himself that the next food distribution day was far away and that he had to be careful not to consume too much. After having filled his belly, he finally changed his clothes and relaxed, lying on the sofa and watching television. There were not many channels, in fact, there were only 3. But good old TV could be considered the only real means of entertainment in the city, but probably a rather poor one by our standards. There was one channel that carried the news 24 hours a day, and while the other 2 were continuously rebroadcasting old movies, neither of which seemed to infringe on the city's ideology. Furthermore, it was a black and white TV since color television had never been invented. Jen tried to watch some movies, but he sadly noticed that he had already watched both movies from both channels several times. To make matters worse, a few moments later, the television lost its signal. An annoyed and enraged Jen was forced to give it a few hits to try to fix it. In the meantime, the sun had already risen and lit up the sad greenish morning sky of the city. A new day had begun. Subsequently, her sister also got out of bed and started to prepare for school, without the 2 exchanging a word. After showering, she put on her school uniform, which consisted of the usual dark blue shirt with a white collar, but with a small yellow symbol, representing the school, located on the shirt over the heart area. She sat down at the table to enjoy the breakfast that had been kindly prepared for her by her brother. It was easy to notice that she hadn't slept much. She yawned and gave the idea that she would fall asleep on the plate at any moment. While her eyes were narrowed, she asked,
"So, did you remember that you have to accompany me to school today?"
Sure, otherwise why the hell would I wake up this early in the morning?
Don't be such a smartass. It's a more than legitimate question, since you always forget even the most obvious things.
Jen did not respond to this last statement. implicitly agreeing with his sister. Another yawn escaped from Jennifer's mouth, and while keeping her sleepy expression, she said,
As for yesterday, you said you would help me.
Really?
Stop being an idiot.
Why are you grumpy?
I'm not grumpy.
Yes, you are.
What are you up to this morning? Never mind. Yesterday, you did say you'd find the solution to my problems. Have you got any ideas?
Nope, not at all.
Jennifer knew he wasn't being sarcastic this time. Her expression suddenly changed. She suddenly got up from the table, after beating her fists on it. From having a sleepy look, she began to get angry.
And how should I handle the situation? If that idiot dares to talk to me, I will use my powers to send him on Saturn.
Don't do it. Saturn is the worst planet.
Jen said sarcastically, with a random British accent.
You're unbearable today.
Calm down, I'll find a solution. It's not that hard.
Her sister, after remaining silent for a few seconds, took a deep breath and sighed.
Okay.
And then abruptly sat down at the table and finished breakfast. The two then left the house and walked towards the school. It wasn't far from their house. It was 15 minutes on foot, 5 by public transport. The two decided to go for a walk, while Jen was trying to figure out how to solve his sister's problems. In the middle of the walk, Jennifer interrupted his thoughts to talk to him.
Jen, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Do you find me pretty?
Jen looked at her, puzzled, then he burst into a big laugh that made all the passers-by look at him.
You idiot, don't do that. They are all watching us.
Sorry, but why such a question? You know the answer very well.
Lately, I've started to have some doubts.
She said while shyly pointing her finger at her flat chest.
Ah, I get it.
Jen said, trying to hold back his urge to laugh.
It's humiliating to compare myself to Bennett. Boys do it all the time.
And why should you care? At your age, it is obvious that someone like her is followed by all those idiotic male teenagers.
But that's unfair. She was born like that. She didn't do anything to deserve it.
Even if she was, why does it bother you?
I would like the same attention as well. I want to be the most popular girl in the class.
Why?
Because this would make me happy.
Recently I asked myself what happiness is, but I don't think you can reach it with some foolish ambition. You should be satisfied with what you have. You could have found yourself in the same spot of that little red-haired boy. You use your powers to become more popular, so I don't understand why it bothers you that she does the same by using her gift.
Because my powers are not comparable to a pair of boobs.
I've told you 1,000 times, your powers don't make you any more special than the others. You too will be submerged in your whole life with problems, just like normal people. So, you're wrong, your powers are comparable to a pair of boobs.
But I have committed myself to become good at other things as well. I do well in all subjects, but she is only able to pass the tests, because my other classmates always help her.
Trust me, in the long run, she will pay for it, while you'll enjoy the fruits of your hard work. Shit, you're an IDAS, do you really think she has a better future than yours?
I don't know, I just know that I hate her.
Don't use the word hate for situations like this. Believe me, to get to hate someone, this someone must have done much more serious things towards you.
Jen claimed while reflecting upon his own words after he said so. Jennifer did not respond to this last statement, implicitly agreeing with her brother. They continued to talk about unimportant topics until they arrived not too far from the school.
Listen, you don't have to do anything today, just ignore that idiot and play dumb. Eventually, your classmates and the school will forget about it.
It wasn't quite the plan I expected, but I accept it.
Well, it's better than sending him to Saturn.
Very funny. See you at home, Jen.
Bye-bye,
he said, waving his hand as she walked away towards the school building. Jen began walking back home. He believed her sister's ambition to become the most popular girl in her school was making her more miserable. After realizing this, he quickly picked his list of happiness from his pockets and wrote. Number 2. Ambition is another big obstacle on our path to happiness. You have to live by being satisfied with what you have. He remembered that Sabu had spoken of both ambition and pride, describing them as soul poisons. He immediately understood that he could only agree with the old man from this point of view. He also noticed how these were the names by which two of the most prominent members of the Purifiers, Gluttony and Pride, were known. In particular, gluttony was seen as the insatiable, the one who always wanted more power without ever being satisfied. Humans are creatures who spend their whole lives desiring and satisfying their needs, and desiring too much could only lead to unhappiness. He believed that it was essential to know how to be satisfied in order to be happy, and that ambitious people, even after having achieved their goals, can never be happy if they continue to desire what they don't have. This doesn't mean that you have to live a life without goals, but you simply must not have too high expectations from life and yourself. Satisfied with the conclusions he was able to draw, Jen continued his walk in a good mood. He watched the hundreds of students around the school, and remembered when he too was a teenager. He didn't have good memories. He remembered mostly the bullying by his classmates. Awful pranks, insults, and sometimes even beatings were commonplace. He was a poor helpless midget, withdrawn and anxious. He was not much different from Sean. His parents hadn't helped him at all. In fact, he was often beaten, even by his father, for poor performance in school. The life he had had in his youth was a prison, constant humiliation from classmates, unjustifiably strict parents, and no one he could call a friend. He cried desperately, but he could only weep inside because no one would listen to his tears. If his parents had seen him cry, the situation would have been even worse. He despised himself and couldn't stand his inability to fight back. He just hated his life.
Hate,
he thought.
Jennifer doesn't have the faintest idea of what it means to hate. I hated my father, I hated my school, I hated my fucking life. Hating is like loving, it's something that comes from your guts, something that consumes you inside. If love burns with the fire of passion, hate burns with the fire of the desire to destroy everything that stands in front of you. I'm pretty sure there is no afterlife, but I like to imagine that my disgusting father is burning in hell. But there was a right decision he made. My parents decided to die in the Green Revolt and let me take care of Jennifer and Jane. Doing it was simple. It was enough for me to do exactly the opposite of everything he did with me. Just one thing. What kind of fucking coincidence is that the person I hated the most in this world died on the same day as the person I loved the most?
His good mood was slightly ruined by the torment these thoughts represented. He was thinking of her once more, the only person he had ever loved, the only person who understood him, the only person who had made him happy.
My dear,
he thought,
I want to put the past behind me, but it's difficult if you keep me from forgetting what we were and what we could have been. When will you finally get out of my head?